Some empires fell to invaders, most fell to the idiocy of their own rulers. This video isn't about heroes, it's about the masterminds of self-destruction. Today's menu: 33 perfectly executed ways to wipe out everything your ancestors built. 1. First up, the Roman Empire, featuring Emperor Commodus, a man whose daddy issues were so severe he decided to LARP as Hercules instead of, running the most powerful empire on Earth. While barbarians were knocking on the door and the economy was taking a nosedive, this emperor man-child was busy with his gladiator side hustle. And we're not talking epic duels here. He'd fight crippled dudes, terrified prisoners tied to a post, and probably stray cats that wandered into the Colosseum. He demanded to be paid a fortune for these appearances from the state treasury, basically making the taxpayer fund his WWE fantasy camp. Imagine the empire is literally on fire, and the guy in charge is in the backyard flexing in a lion skin. His admin team finally decided they'd had enough of the corporate retreat from hell and had him professionally strangled. What a legacy. 2. If you thought Commodus was peak weird, allow me to introduce Khumarawayh of Egypt, who apparently saw Commodus's reign and said, "Hold my fermented grape juice." This guy inherited a rich and stable empire and immediately decided to turn it into the world's most expensive and toxic funhouse. Terrified of assassins, he slept on a custom-made air mattress floating in a swimming pool filled with mercury. I am not making this up. His logic, if you can call it that, was the shimmering liquid would alert him to intruders. To top it off, he had a tame lion guard his bedroom, because nothing says, "I'm a stable leader," like a giant cat that could eat you if it has a bad day. He basically bankrupted an entire country for the world's most poisonous waterbed. The empire imploded the second he was gone, proving that you can't govern from inside a neurotoxin-filled bouncy castle. 3. And now for a hot tip from China's Western Jin dynasty: never, ever go into business with family. After unifying the country, Emperor Wu came up with a corporate restructuring plan from hell. He thought, what's the best way to secure my legacy? I know. I'll give all my ambitious, power-hungry relatives their own armies and territories. You can almost hear the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme starting to play. The result wasn't just friendly competition, it was the War of the Eight Princes, the most destructive, bring-your-cousin-to-work day in history. They butchered each other, destroyed the country's infrastructure, and completely ignored the northern border. This chaos was basically a giant neon sign for outside invaders that read, "Come on in, we're too busy killing each other." And they did. The end. 4. Let's talk about Sultan Mahmud of the Ghaznavid Empire, a man who was basically addicted to raiding India. He was the Michael Jordan of looting temples, launching 17 separate campaigns to haul back mountains of gold. The guy was a genius at offense. The problem? He had the defensive awareness of a rock. While he was off on his annual smash-and-grab tour, he left his own empire's back door not just unlocked, but wide open with a pot of coffee on. This glaring vulnerability was spotted by the Seljuk Turks, who didn't even have to fight hard. They just sort of moved in. They casually took over his northern provinces, built a power base, and then smashed his army when he finally came home. He was so focused on farming loot in the expansion pack that he let another player capture his main base. 5. Imagine being personally propped up by the deadliest conqueror on the planet, Tamerlane, and then deciding to stab him in the back. This is the story of Toktamish, Khan of the Golden Horde, a man whose ambition was writing checks his survival skills couldn't cash. After Tamerlane helped him secure his throne, Toktamish got cocky and invaded his mentor's territory. This was a bad move. Tamerlane didn't just get mad, he got methodical. His revenge wasn't just a war, it was a mission to delete Toktamish's entire existence from the server. He crushed his armies, systematically leveled his major cities, and even rerouted the Silk Road to bankrupt the horde permanently. The lesson here is simple. Don't bite the hand that feeds you, especially if that hand is attached to a guy who treats genocide as a form of urban renewal. 6. The Byzantine Empire's server was crashing in the early 1200s, so they called the worst IT support in history, the Fourth Crusade. Needing military muscle, they made a deal with an army of heavily armed Western European knights to help them out. But when the Byzantines' credit card was declined, the Crusaders decided on an alternative payment plan: grand larceny. In 1204, these allies turned on the city of Constantinople and sacked it. This was less of a holy war and more of a Black Friday riot in the world's most opulent mall. They stole everything that wasn't nailed down, melted priceless art for pocket change, and left the once mighty empire a smoldering, broken wreck. It was the ultimate "thanks for the help, guys, really" moment, delivered with a sword to the back. 7. The Hittites basically invented the tank in an age of swords. They were the first to master iron, giving them a technological edge so massive it was almost unfair. They had the key to the future, so what did they do with it? They put it in a locked box, inside another locked box, and buried it under the palace. Their official policy was, and I'm paraphrasing here, "This is way too cool for the regular army." They armed only their elite special forces with iron weapons, while the vast majority of their soldiers were still using bronze butter knives. It's like inventing the internet and only using it to email yourself. So when the Bronze Age collapse came, a perfect storm of invasions and disasters, their handful of Iron Men were completely swamped. Their secret weapon stayed secret, and their empire became history. 8. Finally, we have the Khwarezmian Shah, who gives a masterclass in how to piss off the wrong guy. When Genghis Khan sent a massive trade caravan to his empire, hoping to open up peaceful relations, the governor of a border town, in a move of galaxy brain genius, executed them as spies. Genghis, surprisingly patient at this stage, sent another set of diplomats to basically ask, "Are you sure about that?" The Shah's response was to behead the lead ambassador and shave the beards off the other two. This wasn't just a declaration of war. This was hitting the delete empire button on purpose. Genghis Khan's revenge was so complete, so utterly devastating, that the Khwarezmian Empire was basically scrubbed from the map. That, folks, is what we call an F around and find out moment on a geopolitical scale. 9. The Samanid Empire in Central Asia thought they were playing 4D chess with their military. Their brilliant idea? To create an entire army of slave soldiers called ghulams. They'd buy these guys as kids, train them to be ultimate warriors, and ensure their loyalty was hardwired to the throne. It was the ultimate build-a-soldier workshop. The problem is, when you create a super-elite, cohesive military force and they're the only competent people in the entire empire, they start to notice things. Like the fact that they have all the swords. In a move of self-sabotage so perfect it should be in a museum, the Samanids funded, trained, and armed the very men who would eventually overthrow them and start their own dynasty. It's like hiring an intern, giving them all your passwords, and then being shocked when they change the locks and start calling themselves CEO. 10. Now let's head to the Aztec Empire for one of history's most catastrophic meet and greets. When Hernan Cortés and his handful of bearded, sunburnt conquistadors showed up, Emperor Moctezuma II had a bit of a meltdown. See, an ancient prophecy foretold the return of a pale, bearded god and Cortés. Well, he fit the description. So Moctezuma was stuck. Is this a divine being I must worship? Or just a weird dude who smells funny and has an unhealthy interest in my gold? Instead of picking a side, he chose the worst possible option. He invited them into the capital city of Tenochtitlan as VIP guests. Cortés, who probably couldn't believe his luck, walked right in, took Moctezuma hostage in his own palace, and kickstarted the end of the Aztec civilization. It's the ultimate example of social anxiety leading to imperial collapse. 11. Welcome to the Khmer Empire, a civilization that went bankrupt due to an uncontrollable addiction to building ridiculously huge stone temples. You know Angkor Wat? That was just one of their many mega projects. Their rulers were locked in an architectural arms race, each trying to outdo the last with a bigger, more elaborate temple complex. It was a 1,000-year-long episode of Extreme Makeover Temple Edition. The issue? All this construction cost a fortune. They diverted insane amounts of labor, food, and wealth into these stone vanity projects, completely neglecting things like, oh, I don't know, defense, the economy. When their enemies finally showed up, they found a magnificent-looking empire that was basically a hollow chocolate bunny, impressive on the outside, but completely empty within and easy to smash. 12. If you ever think you're having a bad day, just remember the Incan Empire in 1532. Two brothers, Huascar and Atahualpa, had just finished a brutal, bloody civil war over who got to be the new emperor. The empire was fractured, exhausted, and deeply divided. And right at that exact moment, as they were still cleaning up the mess from their family feud, a guy named Francisco Pizarro showed up with fewer than 200 men. The timing couldn't have been worse if it was planned by a vindictive god. The Incas were so busy fighting each other that they couldn't muster a unified defense against a tiny group of adventurers. Pizarro basically waltzed into a party that had already been wrecked by the hosts, and he just took the house. It was the universe's ultimate prank call, and the Incas were on the line. 13. Over in Mughal India, Emperor Aurangzeb looked at a massive, prosperous, and relatively tolerant empire and decided, you know what this needs? A massive dose of religious intolerance. His predecessors, like Akbar the Great, had built their success on a policy of inclusion, winning the loyalty of the empire's vast Hindu majority. Aurangzeb threw that entire playbook into a bonfire. He reintroduced taxes that specifically targeted non-Muslims and went on a temple-demolishing spree. The predictable result? Rebellions. So many rebellions. He spent pretty much his entire 49-year reign running around trying to put out the fires he himself had started. This constant warfare drained the treasury and shattered the unity of the empire, leaving it ripe for collapse. His motto was basically, if it ain't broke, smash it with a hammer. 14. The Vijayanagara Empire in southern India thought it was a genius political player. For years, they thrived by meddling in the affairs of the neighboring Muslim sultanates. They'd ally with one sultan to beat up another, then switch sides, constantly playing their rivals against each other like a master puppeteer. They were the smug drama stirrers of the neighborhood. There was just one tiny flaw in this master plan. Eventually, the neighbors started talking. The sultans, tired of being used as pawns in Vijayanagara's games, did the one thing the empire never expected. They formed a super alliance. All five of them put their differences aside, ganged up on their common tormentor, and utterly annihilated the Vijayanagara army in a single battle. It was the historical equivalent of the entire high school cafeteria teaming up to dunk the head bully in the toilet. 15. Tamerlane, the guy who wrecked the Golden Horde, was a god-tier conqueror. He built one of the largest empires in history through sheer, terrifying force. He was fantastic at the conquering part. The governing part? Not so much. His empire wasn't a state, it was a personal project held together by his reputation and the fact that everyone was petrified of him. He never set up a stable administration or a clear line of succession. He was like a guy who is amazing at building an incredibly complex Jenga tower, but has no plan for what happens when he leaves the room. The second Tamerlane died, the entire structure wobbled for a minute and then spectacularly collapsed into a chaotic mess of infighting among his heirs. The empire barely outlasted its founder. 16. The ancient Ghana Empire in West Africa was sitting on a literal gold mine. They controlled some of the richest gold fields in the world, and this trade made them fabulously wealthy and powerful. They had one job: keep the location of the gold a secret. So what did they do? They told everyone. When Arab traders came through, the Ghanaians were apparently so eager to do business that they basically handed them a treasure map with a giant X on it. This was an act of commercial naivety on an epic scale. Suddenly, everyone knew where the gold was, and every rival kingdom and rising power in the region wanted a piece of that action. This leak of critical intel led to a series of invasions and pressures that eventually broke the empire's monopoly and led to its decline. It was the ultimate loose lip sink ships, or in this case, sink empires. 17. Alexander the Great was a certified prodigy at conquering the known world. But when it came to succession planning, the guy completely dropped the ball. After carving out a colossal empire that stretched from Greece to India, he died at 32, basically leaving the keys to the world's biggest kingdom on the table. When his generals gathered around his deathbed and asked who the empire should go to, Alexander allegedly muttered, "To the strongest." This wasn't a profound statement. It was the starting pistol for the bloodiest, most chaotic, 50-year-long free-for-all in history. His top generals, the so-called successors, immediately started butchering each other, and Alexander's entire family to claim the prize. His final words might as well have been, "Y'all figure it out, I'm out," triggering a global battle royale that tore his life's work to shreds. 18. Fast forward to the early 20th century, and we have the Ottoman Empire, the legendary sick man of Europe. They were old, creaky, and desperately needed a win. So when World War I broke out, they had a choice to make. They could have stayed neutral, maybe sold weapons to both sides and played it safe. But no, they decided to jump into the geopolitical mosh pit. And who did they bet on? Imperial Germany. It's like showing up to a casino, seeing one table is on a hot streak, and the other is just lighting money on fire and confidently placing all your chips on the burning pile. Their brilliant strategic move resulted in their armies getting trounced on multiple fronts, their territories getting carved up like a Thanksgiving turkey by the victors, and the complete dissolution of a 600-year-old empire. A truly spectacular own goal. 19. Let's talk about the Swedish Empire and its ruler, King Charles V, a man who was so pathologically obsessed with fighting Russia that he forgot about literally everything else. At the start of the 18th century, Sweden was a certified European superpower. Charles was a military genius, but he had a one-track mind, and that track led straight to Moscow. He dragged his army deep into the vast, frozen expanse of Russia, ignoring supply lines, common sense, and the pleading of his advisors. The campaign culminated in the disastrous Battle of Poltava, where his starving, exhausted army was annihilated. Charles himself had to flee for his life. This single, obsessive adventure completely shattered Sweden's military power and ended its brief run as a great empire. It was a national case of letting one toxic rivalry ruin your entire life. 20. And now for a timeless classic in the dumb military mistakes category, starring Napoleon Bonaparte. By 1812, this guy had basically conquered all of Europe. He was the final boss of the continent, but he just couldn't let Russia's defiance slide. So he made the single most famously idiotic decision in military history. He invaded Russia. But he didn't just invade. He timed his invasion so that his army would be stuck there when winter hit. You know, the Russian winter. The one that eats armies for breakfast. His legendary Grande Armée wasn't defeated by the Russian army as much as it was by General Frost and General Famine. He marched in with over 600,000 men and limped out with less than 100,000. It was a self-inflicted wound so catastrophic it marked the beginning of his end. 21. The Songhai Empire in West Africa was a dominant force, boasting a massive and feared cavalry. They were the kings of the old-school battlefield. But when the world started changing, they stubbornly refused to read the memo. In the late 16th century, a much smaller Moroccan army invaded. The Songhai army, confident in their numbers and their horsemen, rode out to meet them. There was just one problem. The Moroccans had brought guns. Lots of them. The ensuing battle was less of a fight and more of a firing range demonstration. The Songhai cavalry charged bravely, and the Moroccan musketeers just stood there and calmly shot them to pieces. Their complete and utter disdain for newfangled gunpowder technology got their entire elite army wiped out in a single afternoon, and their empire collapsed almost overnight. They literally brought horses to a gunfight. 22. The Empire of Mali, once the richest empire on earth thanks to its obscene amounts of gold, essentially committed suicide by sibling rivalry. After the death of its legendary ruler, Mansa Musa, his successors seemed more interested in fighting each other for the throne than actually governing. Instead of securing their borders or managing their immense wealth, they plunged the empire into a series of debilitating civil wars. It was like a bunch of lottery winners suing each other into poverty. While the royal family was busy with their internal drama, neighboring states and ambitious rivals started chipping away at Mali's territory, raiding their trade routes and stealing their sources of gold. By the time they stopped fighting each other, there wasn't much of an empire left to rule. 23. Let's circle back to the Khwarezmian Empire for a second, because their stupidity was a multi-layered cake. We already covered the part where they executed Mongol envoys, which was like poking a dragon in the eye. But it gets dumber. When the full-scale Mongol invasion began, the Shah made another fatal error. Instead of concentrating his massive army for a decisive battle, he panicked and scattered his troops into garrison duty across various cities. His logic was to defend everywhere at once. In reality, this allowed Genghis Khan's forces to destroy his armies piece by piece, like a wolf picking off a scattered flock of sheep. He had the numbers to put up a real fight, but his strategy was so monumentally incompetent that he basically served his empire up to the Mongols on a silver platter, city by city. 24. Welcome to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a rickety, multi-ethnic empire that was basically a chaotic apartment building where none of the tenants liked each other. In 1914, after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, they saw an opportunity to finally crush their annoying neighbor, Serbia. They issued an ultimatum to Serbia that was so harsh and demanding, it was specifically designed to be rejected. They wanted a war, but a small local one. It's like trying to start a fistfight with one guy in a bar that's filled with his heavily armed extended family. Their little Balkan spat triggered a cascade of alliances that spiraled into World War I, a conflict that utterly destroyed the Austro-Hungarian Empire and redrew the map of Europe. They wanted to start a small fire and ended up burning their own house down along with the rest of the neighborhood. 25. Let's talk about the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, an empire that invented a political system so unbelievably dysfunctional, it basically voted itself out of existence. It was called the liberum veto, which translates to free veto. This rule allowed any single member of the parliament to not only block a piece of legislation, but to dissolve the entire parliamentary session and nullify everything that had already been decided. Imagine trying to order a pizza with a group of friends, and one guy, Kevin, can cancel the whole order because he doesn't like mushrooms. Now apply that logic to running a country. Foreign powers quickly realized they didn't need to invade. They could just bribe one drunk nobleman to stand up and shout, "I object!" This led to centuries of political paralysis, turning a once mighty state into a helpless mess that its neighbors eventually carved up for dinner. 26. The Second Bulgarian Empire gives us a textbook lesson from the How to Wreck Your Kingdom 101 syllabus. Tsar Ivan Alexander, facing the rising threat of the Ottoman Turks, looked at his relatively stable empire and decided the best way to secure its future was to chop it in half. He literally divided the empire between his two sons before he died. This wasn't some strategic masterstroke. It was like seeing a wolf approach your two chickens and deciding the best defense is to put them in separate, smaller, and much weaker pens. Predictably, the Ottomans couldn't believe their luck. Instead of facing one unified Bulgarian state, they got to fight two bickering, weakened mini-kingdoms, which they picked off one by one with terrifying ease. It was a self-inflicted wound that fast-tracked the Ottoman conquest of the Balkans. 27. We're back in Mughal India because the decline of this empire was a slow-motion train wreck with multiple points of failure. After the powerhouse emperors like Akbar and Shah Jahan, the guy who built the Taj Mahal, the quality of leadership took a nosedive. The later Mughal rulers were less interested in administration and more interested in court intrigue, poetry, and watching their empire crumble around them. The empire became a revolving door of weak rulers, palace coups, and endless infighting among nobles. As the central government became a joke, trade routes became unsafe, tax collection fell apart, and regional governors basically declared independence. It wasn't one single mistake, but a prolonged collective decision to just stop trying, allowing the empire to die of sheer neglect. 28. Let's visit Imperial Japan in World War II, the architects of one of the most famously backfiring plans in military history. In 1941, Japan wanted to secure resources in Southeast Asia, but they knew the USA might interfere. So they came up with a brilliant plan. Launch a surprise attack on the US naval base at Pearl Harbor to cripple their fleet and buy some time. In theory, it was a knockout punch. In reality, it was like punching a sleeping grizzly bear in the face to steal its picnic basket. The attack did immense damage, but instead of intimidating the United States, it enraged them beyond belief, galvanizing a divided nation into a single-minded war machine. Japan's genius plan to keep America out of the war succeeded only in dragging an industrial superpower with near-infinite resources into the fight, guaranteeing their own eventual crushing defeat. 29. The Spanish Empire at its peak was a global superpower, dripping with gold and silver from the New World. So, what did they do with all this success? They decided to commit economic suicide for religious reasons. In 1492, they issued the Alhambra Decree, expelling all practicing Jews from the country. A few years later, they did the same to the Muslims. The problem was that these groups made up a huge chunk of Spain's most skilled merchants, bankers, artisans, and scholars. They kicked out their middle class and their financial engine. This move was a catastrophic brain drain that crippled the Spanish economy for centuries, proving that intolerance isn't just morally bankrupt. It's also a fantastic way to go broke on a national scale. 30. The Carthaginian Empire, Rome's greatest rival, survived brutal wars and epic conflicts, only to be nearly destroyed by a mistake in their accounting department. After the First Punic War, Carthage found itself short on cash and decided to stiff the thousands of mercenaries they had hired to fight for them. They refused to pay them their promised wages. This is generally considered a bad business practice, especially when your clients are heavily armed, battle-hardened professional soldiers. The enraged mercenaries revolted in what became known as the Mercenary War, a conflict so brutal and savage that it terrified the ancient world. The war almost destroyed Carthage from within and weakened it so badly that it set the stage for its eventual destruction by Rome. The lesson: always, always pay your contractors. 31. Let's talk about the Soviet Union, an empire that managed to lose a war without a single shot being fired between the main opponents. During the Cold War, the USSR got locked into an arms race with the United States, a country whose economy was basically a monster truck powered by capitalism. The Soviets tried to keep up, matching the US missile for missile, tank for tank. But their rigid, centrally planned economy just couldn't sustain it. They poured insane amounts of their national budget into the military while their people were literally lining up for toilet paper. This unsustainable spending spree, coupled with a disastrous war in Afghanistan, bled their economy dry. They didn't get conquered. They went bankrupt trying to win a contest they could never afford to be in. They collapsed under the weight of their own missiles. 32. In the 19th century, while the rest of the world was going through the Industrial Revolution, China's Qing dynasty decided to take a hard pass. Convinced of their own cultural superiority, they adopted a policy of stubborn isolationism, viewing Western technology and ideas as crude novelties. They saw no need to modernize their military or economy. This arrogance came back to bite them hard during the Opium Wars. The British, with their modern steamships and advanced rifles, showed up and completely humiliated the Qing forces, who were still using tactics and weapons from centuries prior. China's refusal to adapt turned a once mighty empire into a punching bag for any Western power that wanted to carve out a piece for itself. It was a tragic lesson in the dangers of thinking you're too cool for progress. 33. And finally, we have the Russian Empire, which in 1914 decided to enthusiastically jump into the meat grinder of World War I. The problem was, their empire was a deeply troubled, semi-industrialized state with a massively unhappy population, held together by the Tsar's increasingly shaky authority. Sending millions of ill-equipped peasants into a brutal modern war was like pouring gasoline on a smoldering fire. The war effort was a disaster, leading to horrific casualties, food shortages, and total economic collapse. This pushed the Russian people past their breaking point, leading directly to the Russian Revolution, the execution of the Tsar, and the violent end of the empire. Their entry into the war wasn't just a mistake. It was the final, fatal act that brought the whole rotten structure crashing down. Empires didn't collapse because of enemies. They collapsed because of clowns in charge. History made that pretty clear. But are we paying attention? Drop a comment. Which modern leader is speedrunning their way to imperial disaster? Name names. And if watching the world burn, historically, made your day, hit like and subscribe. There's more where that came from.